Hey everybody, welcome back to Old World Legends. We're going to quickly pick up part 2 of our Dwarven review. Last time we went over the characters and the magic art items or runes, if you will. And so this time we're going to talk about the units and the rest of the army composition. So Evan, where did we leave off, sir?
All right, so we're going to look at the composition list for the other half of your army, potentially. We've got the core units here. So you always have access to, the Dwarf Warriors, the Quarrellers, and Thunderers. You can have as many of those as you'd like. You have 0 to 1 unit of Rangers as a core choice. That's very typically taken. They're a very useful unit. And then if your general's a king, you can have 0 to 1 units of Longbeards as taken as core choice. Now, this is interesting because it's just king. It's not Thane, so it's small army sizes. If you're playing like a 500-point game, you don't necessarily have enough points to fit a king in there. Well, that's interesting. So if you had a Thane as your general, you would have to have some other unit as your core choice. So that's interesting. And then we have special. So there's Longbeards, Ironbreakers, Miners, Slayers, Gyrocopters. All interesting choices. And then 0 to 1 unit of Hammers per king or Thane. So that one is more open-ended. Now, Hammers are my favorite dwarf unit. Freaking love those dudes.
They're really good.
They're adorable. You know what they're really good at, Mike? The siege rules that I wrote. That's what they're really good at.
We're not talking about Siege today, Evan. We'll talk about Siege in the future. But yes, that is something we are excited about, and hopefully later this year we'll be talking more about it. But right now we're talking about dwarves. Let's focus on the dwarves.
Well, dwarves are good at sieges, but they also have 0 to 3 war machines per 1,000 points. So also a little bit of a funny one. Now, when they released their rules for games that are kind of sub 500 points for the skirmish games, they did make mentions of exceptions for this 0 to 1 per 1,000. So if you're playing a 500-point escalation game, fair enough, you should probably be able to bring like a bolt thrower. Like you shouldn't be able to just not be able to have any artillery. And they do mention that in their core rules, so we'll have to go over that when we talk about Escalation League, which was also on my mind. But yeah, if you have several war machines, I don't think you need more than 6 cannons, to be honest. It's a lot. And then you've in rare you've got Rangers. You can have more Ranger units here. You have Irondrakes, which are also very, very useful. They're some of the most durable shooting units in the game. And then you have Gyrobombers. I love Gyrobombers in Total War. They're really fun to micromanage, walking them around and dropping bombs on people. And then we have war machines that are a little more of the rare variety. We've got the organ gun and the flame cannon. Now the flame cannon, super cute. I love this thing. It's adorable. I really want one of these things. I would love to, because I just like using that template. It's just fun. So yeah,
absolutely.
But you can see that we basically have heavy infantry, missile infantry, helicopters, and artillery. That's what we got.
Yep. And that's all the dwarves typically need. And again, and in the future, we'll talk about the Arcane Journal and go through more of that stuff. But right now, we're just talking about the core, the Grand Army that comes with that. So yeah, let's dive into core units, sir. So what did the dwarves start with on their roster?
So we have the Dwarf Warriors, the very rarely seen regular rank and file homeboy. But you know what? I think they've got a lot going for them. In a lot of ways, especially with some of those rumored changes from the FAQ that might be coming up. But we've got, a dwarf stat line, so your movement 3, but having weapon skill 4 in your core troops is very huge. I think that difference between 3 and 4 is very much felt by lizardmen and ogre players when your core infantry is weapon skill 3 but still expensive. It very much hurts to be hit on 3s by lots of other people. And they're strength 3, but I don't think that if you're taking a hand weapon shield dwarf, you actually care about doing damage whatsoever. You just want to sit there and just be durable. And you know what? You get to have that toughness 4, very high leadership, and shields and heavy armor. That is just a durable little brick that a lot of things have a hard time hurting. And they can be taken in small units as well. So I don't think these guys are as out there as you might suggest by looking at army lists.
You're not wrong, and to be fair, that's not a specific thing to the dwarf army list. This is in general, quite frankly, across pretty much all the armies in the game right now. That effectively, you have only so many points to field, and it's for the I believe the core units are pointed for the core rank and file infantry in the game, whether you're chaos, whether you're dwarves, whether you're vampire, whatever you are. Typically those core units do not have very limited damage output, so they have fairly limited utility, and they're mostly taking up space. Now, that being said, taking up space is a very valuable thing to have on the battlefield, in terms of blocking flanks, protecting things, positioning. Right, there's a ton of value to that, but I think the reason why we see so little of it in the current meta of the game is just, I think they're just pointed a little too high. I think if we saw those core units across all the different armies, where it's like instead of 8 points for a dwarf warrior, if it was 6 points, I think we'd see a lot more of these on the tabletop. And it's not that they need to be more effective. And I think that's the problem where everyone starts saying, like, well, it's 8 points for this unit, it's never going to kill anything. Versus if it's a few more points and I can take that king, and now I can take that much more effective unit that has a really good chance at killing something instead of this core unit. And this is true for almost every army out there right now. So I think it's not that they're not good. They are good. I think it's just that for the utility they bring to the battlefield, for their points cost relative to something that's a few more points and way more effective, which is why we don't see it. So I'm hoping we will see some
Yeah.
adjustments from GW in the future that will make it a little more enticing. So we will see more of these core choices across all the factions, including dwarves.
That might be true, but the other thing is that a lot of the dwarf armies I see are very small. They got barely any guys on the field, and these are your cheapest dwarves you can bring to the battle. So if you want just have a lot of dwarves showing up, this is one of the best ways to do that. I mean, if you just, for
Yeah.
example, a lot of the missions that I write for Gleaming Pennant rules and for our, tournaments, they have
Hmm.
objectives in multiple places on the table. So you can't just have a single Longbeard brick with a king in it and expect to capture all of the objectives at the same time. So you need to have multiple different units. And how are you going to do that, right? And I think a really clean way to do that is to have one unit that's maybe like, kind of shooting and staying in the back, another unit that's aggressive and going forward. And then if you have,
Hmm.
more hedging units, because again, if the other person is bringing high elf archers or goblins or, Empire State troops, then the dwarf
Hmm.
warriors do have somebody that they can go and fight. And you know what? Dwarf warriors versus high elf spearmen or goblins or state troops, I think the warriors might just win or at the very least not lose.
Well, that's true. And that's where they have the higher weapon skill, the high leadership, the high toughness.
Yeah.
They have really good core stats, I
And the
think,
armor.
which is part of the reason why you're paying for it. That's right. And the armor. And I think exactly right. The core, if you're just playing out of the book kill point missions, right? You're incentivized to give up as few points and to kill as much as you can. So you're not incentivized to take more of these. Let's take up space. Let's control the battlefield. And I think as the meta starts shifting, to Evan's point, towards more of scenarios, hopefully the match play rules coming out soon will also really shift more towards scenario play and controlling the battlefield and alternate objectives where it's not just about killing. I think we will. I think, Evan, you're absolutely right. We're going to see more of this shift towards having more bodies on the table brings significantly more value to winning the mission, not necessarily killing. That will also influence how many of these we're going to see on the table.
Yeah, I think the dwarf warrior might be the cheapest. If you want to do no damage whatsoever but sit there and just survive, I buy veteran state troops for I think 8 points a model that have a hand weapon, a shield. They've got veteran, but they're toughness 3.
Hmm.
And so for one more point, I could have a dwarf who's toughness 4 with better armor.
Yeah, with heavy
And I
armor.
and I
Yeah.
usually just buy my state troops to sit there and have combat res, and that's it.
And better leadership.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yep. All
not
right.
the worst
So
thing.
what else? Anything else to talk about them?
They have
That
shield
was
wall.
pretty much it.
That's adorable.
Okay. Okay. And they hate orcs and goblins. So again, fun, flavorful, but contextual. You have to be playing versus an orc unit for that to come to play.
So Longbeards are a bit more of a staple unit, very similar to. I mean, I play ogres all the time, and they're very similar to the Iron Guts, where
Hmm. Hmm.
everyone else loves them. I can't stand them because I always expect so much more for them, and then they don't deliver for me. So I always try to stick my characters in with the Iron Guts, try to run them around, and every single time I lose combat by 1 or 2 points, they break and flee, and I'll get murdered. And Longbeards are a similar story. We've got a unit that's a lot more expensive, about 50% more
Hmm.
expensive than Dwarf Warrior, and what you get is you get Strength 4 and Weapon Skill 5, and you have Gromroll weapons, but if you very often you're going to try to use the Grey weapons anyway, so you won't get to use that roll.
Yep.
And you can have Veteran, but the regular Warriors can buy that too. So again,
Yeah. What else do they have? Veteran,
it's mostly the
hatred,
Strength 4.
fame. Yeah, the weapon skills. So yeah, to your point, it's 50% more points, right? Going from 8 points to 12 points. And it sounds like not a big number, but when you're taking 20 or 30 of them, it adds up real quick. Once you're talking to a proper sized unit. And yeah, the output is going to be better, but again, you still have the challenge with the dwarf army of, again, with that slower movement of delivering them to an area where they could have that damage output, but they still only have one attack, right? They're going to need other things to support them. And yes, I think for 50% more points, people are typically expecting a lot more than or significantly more output than what they're going to get out of it often.
Yeah, but you're generally buying shields, great weapons, and drilled. So that's 3 points of upgrades per guy. So they're actually 15 points each,
Yeah.
right? Whereas I can take
That,
some cheapy warriors for 9 points each and don't pay for that stuff,
hmm
and I just want them to sit there. So if
hmm
you have Longbeards, you're expecting them to get to do a lot more, and then you need them in particular to not get shot at because with Longbeards they have the same defensive profile, so against like bullets or arrows as a regular
hmm
wolf warrior, so they're going to die just as fast, but they're worth a lot more points.
Yep, and I think that's exactly right. And I think this is where they sit in that middle bracket. They're better. They're higher tier than the warriors, but they're lower tier than the hammerers or right or some of the more elite units in the dwarf army. And they're always struggling to find. Am I really bringing 50% more or more than 50% of my points to the table than a dwarf warrior? And I'd be better off having the core units just kind of take up their space and control the battlefield and get in the way of the enemy, and then I really reserve all these extra points for the more elite things. And so I agree. I think that's typically where players find that struggle between the two. So
In
that
in
makes yeah.
particular, the current meta seems to be 1,000 points of characters, and I need a Death Star from my core allotment. So the Death Star is I take Longbeards and I stick 1,000 points of characters in that Longbeard unit, so then they're good.
Mhm.
But if the meta shifts to say, okay, hold on, you don't get to take 1,000 points of characters, you can only take 600 or 800 points of characters.
But
Well,
I think it's very
now
likely in the match play rules that I think there's a very good chance of that.
not only do you need to fill more space, but you're also going to have more ways to deal with the other person's non character units.
Hmm
And you're going to have less character points to shove into a single Death Star brick. So you're actually going to have to maybe spread them out and then need
Yep.
more units on the table. So I think the paradigm of sticking everybody in a single unit of Longbeards and running it around might shift or at least have other
Yes.
alternatives.
It's likely going to be less viable as we see the Death Stars being, you can pump them up with less character points, makes it less viable, and more the scenarios being less about killing, more about accomplishing other things in the battlefield. Both of these are going to disincentivize players from focusing on Death Stars.
All right, then we have Quarrellers and Thunderers. I mean, a very odd unit because on the one hand we have units that have
Mm.
missile weapons and heavy armor and potentially shields, so you can be very
Hmm
durable. On the other
Yep.
hand, you have a ballistic skill 3 missile unit that isn't really cheap or having poison. So
Yeah, and
the
I
big
think
problem
they're
with that is you
suffering from
so
the
often
same
have
thing.
-2 to hit that starting at ballistic skill 3 means you start at the 4 plus to hit, and you very often have -2 from that to go to a 6 plus, which is really annoying.
Yeah. I agree. I don't think it's this particular unit is suffering from that. I think this addition and all the missile troops are suffering from that. That okay, if we're saying the baseline, which is correct, the baseline stat starts at ballistic skill 3. That's totally reasonable. But there are so many penalties to shooting, and it's so easily with cover, long range, or whatever that you're almost always at that -2. Often you could be more than -2 pretty often too. So
Yeah.
effectively, as soon as you just go from I hit half the time to I'm hitting on sixes only, suddenly the output, even if you had a 30-man unit, is cool. Maybe I do 2 wounds because you still have to hit and then
You're
you
right.
still have to wound and then they still have to fail their armor save. So again, I think it's just the current edition, the balance of it is the punishments, either they needed to raise the ballistic skill of units or they need to reduce the penalties for ballistic skill attacks because right now this is across the
Oh,
whole
I
edition
yeah.
very ineffective.
I will say, however, if you compare them to the state troops that have handguns or crossbows, these guys are a frickin' bargain because they've got toughness 4, better leadership, and heavy armor, and the option to buy shields for only 2 points more than what the state
Yeah.
troop of the handgun costs.
But the problem is that you run into is you take them and you're excited for them, and then you're like, well, how much damage did they actually do that game? And then once something that was a melee unit touched them, they still die. Versus why didn't I just spend all the points on Iron Drakes or more War Machines, right?
Yeah,
And
and
that's
so the
that's
main
where the efficiency.
downside,
It's not that they're bad; the
right?
efficiency just isn't there compared to the alternative selections.
So they can't take the magic banners necessarily that the warriors can, and they only have weapon skill 3 to start with. So that's the
Mhm.
downsides. Again, I think in 8th edition they had weapon skill 4, so it was kind of like, why would I ever take a warrior when for like one more point I can just also have a crossbow and just be like the exact same thing. But now they're
Mhm.
different, and they don't have shield walls, so they can get shields, but they don't have the shield wall rule. And great weapons cost more on them, so you take the great weapons on them, they do cost a lot more. I think the correct play is, to take. If you're going to take these, it's usually because you're taking little smaller units to basically be
Yeah,
like, hey, I'm 50 points for 5 guys. If you want to come over here, cool. You're wasting your time. But otherwise, I'm going to
yeah.
shoot stuff. And then the other way to do it is you put Belagar in a bigger unit of Thunderers because he has a lot of buffs for the Thunderers specifically. But that's a Arcane
Well,
Journal thing.
I think it's also just the player perception is a lot of players want to field these units. They want to field like a 20-man or a 10-man wide unit or park a 20-man unit on a hill or something. They're like, hey, a brick of infantry or knights are going to come at me or a monster and I'm going to gun it down. And they just don't have the output. That being said, they are very effective at taking out like cavalry, right? At smaller units, 5-man units. So they're really good at plinking those smaller things. So they're not going to be that mainline center of the battlefield gun line, but they can be very effective on the sides, on the flanks, plinking away those other utility units that the enemy is bringing to the battlefield. So they can be very effective at that.
Yeah, absolutely. Then we have Rangers. And so again, if you have a unit that has Ballistic Skill 4 with the crossbow, well, all of a sudden you have potentially a lot more damage. I think a lot of the times you hit twice as often because you go from a 6 plus to hit to a 5 plus to hit. So a lot of the times you're suddenly like feeling really good. And
Hmm.
so I think that's why you see Rangers quite often. Also, they have Weapon Skill 4, so they can have a bit of more melee punch while also having a better shooting punch. And at
Hmm.
the end of the day, you already paid 8 points for the regular dwarf underneath all that. So why not have a couple more points and just also have all these other cool rules, right?
Hmm. Yeah,
Uh,
and they also they move through cover, and they're scouts and they're
mhm.
skirmishers, right? So again, and that's if you looked at the normal to Evan's point, the majority of the time you have -2 to hit. So if you're hitting on fives with one more ballistic skill versus sixes, you are effectively instead of a 1 in 6 chance to hit, it's or two, one or two, a 5 or 6 can hit. It's twice as effective the number of potential hits, and it's only 3 more points plus these other rules versus if I took two dwarf quarrelers to have the same odds of never hitting. Well, that's way more points. That's like 16 points versus 11. So it is actually significantly more efficient in terms of output plus bonus rules to take the rangers. Plus the models look really cool.
Yeah, I actually have a whole bunch of the old, I think they're either 6th or 5th edition metal rangers, the Bugman's Rangers with their massive axes. I think they're adorable.
Hmm.
The old metal dwarves look great. I think they're awesome.
Yeah, they're really cool. Hmm.
And so
Yeah,
they also
so that's
have,
why we see rangers
yeah, so they
a
don't
lot.
have close order. But that's fine because open order actually is really good at missile troops. You get to move and then do a pivot potentially. Very rarely you want to do this because of the minuses to hit with the crossbows. But again, you get to do those pivots after like an overrun or after a different kinds of other kinds of moves of that nature. And so there is different kinds of places where open order can suddenly be like, oh, that's super useful.
Yeah.
Um,
Also, because they're scouts, right? That means they're going to have their 360 line of sight for shooting. So this is great for, hey, someone flew to your flank or someone skirted up fast cavalry. They were hiding behind terrain and tried to get behind you. Or beastmen are ambushing you with a 5-man unit or a 10-man unit in the back. So again, rangers just being
yeah,
the better ballistic skill and having a 360, they are even better defensive units or utility for dealing with the other enemies, things that are trying to catch you off guard or to hunt down your war machine. And to Evan's point, if you do give them great weapons or something, yeah, you're not going to get close order, but you could still slam the shooter into the flank of another, combine it with charging with something else, and they can contribute to the fight.
yeah. So I think this is a great rank and file regular old unit. I think they do great at cutting down fast cavalry, holding on flanks, getting to scout somewhere. If
Hmm.
a dwarf player comes to me and says, "Hey, I can't get to the objectives in the middle of the field. I'm too slow." I'm like, "Bro, you got drilled. First of all, you got an anvil that can make you double move. You've got
Hmm.
rangers who can just scout and drop themselves onto the objective like paratroopers.
Hmm.
And hey,
Hmm.
you also got miners who are cute, adorable little men."
Yeah, miners are super cool, but yeah, I think that's that a lot of dwarf players typically a lot of people, and there's nothing wrong with it, but they're like, hey, I love dwarves, I love gun lines, and they're like, I'm going to play my dwarf, and I really want to play them as a gun line where I just sit as far back on the table and I just try and shoot, 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 and that's all how I want to play this
Yeah.
game. And the reality is, the more that this game stops becoming about killing and starts becoming about objectives and scenarios, you have to build combined arms list. You have to build lists that can't just do one thing in order to win your games. You have to be bringing multiple things to the table to play the scenario, to play the objective. And so that's typically a lot of young players or even veteran players get the bloodlust and they make mistakes because they're always charging. Typically, dwarf players often fall into the gun line. I just want to sit here and shoot and drink my beer, not move.
Yeah,
And
if the
that's
dwarf
just
player sits
it's fun.
down, they made a mistake. They're doing something wrong. Like if they just sit
Yeah,
down and
but
they're
it's
like, I'm gonna
not
sit down the
effective.
entire game. I'm like, okay, good luck with
Don't
that.
get me wrong. I'll have a lot of fun playing that game with that dwarf player, but it's going to be challenging for him because he's sitting there drinking his beer, rolling, just shooting his guns. But we'll have a great time though.
So now we reach my favorite unit, which is the
Ooh, why are they your
hammers.
favorite? Why?
Well,
Tell us.
so I mean, first of all, it's their look, okay?
Okay.
Because they have great hammers, and in all the other editions of the game, it was just boring old, okay, guy with great weapon, heavy armor, blah 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 blah. But now
Mm-hmm.
the great hammers have their own rules. They're like the royal guard to the king himself, and they have rules for that too.
Yeah.
They've got stubborn, which is one of my favorite rules because I love to be like harder to make run away. Freaking great, love that. And then they also have a rule that's just like an automatic. I cast a spell on myself to give myself more attacks. That's like an amazing rule. When so it's these guys like hammerers, anyone who
Mm-hmm.
has furious charge, and things like wildwood rangers, where the unit just has a special rule that says, "Cool, I just do twice as much damage now." I think those are
Mm-hmm.
amazing, and it's just you set up those situations where if you charge me, I get twice as many attacks. I'm like, wow, cool. Where's all
So
your frenzied impetuous units? Let me stick them in front of them.
let's dive into that. So what exactly does the Royal Guard do, and what exactly do their hammers do that a great weapon doesn't?
Right. So just to go down it, right? We have weapon skill 5 and strength 4, toughness 4. So we have the same stat line of a Longbeard, right? But
Mm-hmm.
we cost 4 more points. And what do we get for that? Well, we had a great weapon, but it's actually a hammer, so it's better than a great weapon. It's a great hammer.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, we have the Royal Guard, which is where if you have the King or Thane, basically they can issue and accept challenges for them if they're in the unit. So that's really cool. If
Great.
you have a dragon that shows
Mm-hmm.
up, every individual regular guy can just do that.
Beat him
Um,
one dwarf at a time until that dragon gets bored or fed up or fails from combat resolution and he has to flee.
and then Stoic Defenders is when it's charged in the front. No, it actually just did they FAQ it to be charged in the front only, or is it just no? That's the rune of hesitation, I think. Anyway,
Yeah,
but
that
when
was
you're charged, they get +1 initiative and attack.
that's awesome.
And then the Great
Yeah.
Hammer themselves are Strength +2, AP2, Armor Bane 2. So
Ooh,
better than a Great Weapon because on a 6 it goes to AP4. They have magical attacks and they do not have the Strikes Last rule.
that's so good. So this is definitely the come at me bro unit of the entire this come at me, come on, woo, bring it. They are definitely goading the enemy to charge them, daring them. So they are pricey at 16 points, but they pack a lot of rules, a lot of very effective rules, and some very effective
Well,
weapons
and
as
let's
well.
not forget that, hey, those Longbeards, they're actually 15 points because the people buy every single upgrade you can on the Longbeards too. So the
Hmm.
Longbeards are usually 15. These guys, if you take shields, and I would probably say shields and drilled at least, that's 18, but it's only a few more points for potentially having not only stubborn, but also the I hit you twice
All
as
those
many
other
times.
benefits. Right, and this is exactly where we have that problem of Longbeards are not bad, but it's like, well, if I'm already investing that many points, the potential output from the hammerers is so much higher. Might as well get the hammerers. In which case, then now
Yeah, but
it
that
feels
that
like why am I paying the points for the
right. Well,
Longbeards?
then we circle back to what slot are they in because the Longbeards are your Croy choice and the Hammers aren't.
Hmm.
So, and that's
Yep.
why when you have 1,000 points of characters and then you have to have some kind of an army come out of your core slot, you take the Longbeards. But if you didn't have 1,000 points of characters, or if there was less than 500 points of core, well, then maybe people will be
I,
bringing these kind of things.
I think we'll see some more variety, which
Yeah.
I'm very much looking forward to.
Also, if these guys are standing on top of a castle wall, you are screwed. Anyway, um,
And they look really cool. Ironbreakers, I actually love these models. I remember when they were released. I think the models still hold up. I think they're super, super cool. It was like, what's the most armored dwarf we could make? And we got the Ironbreak. They just look cool, and I really like the helmets and everything. So I know you love the hammer look, and the hammers are great. I personally really love the Ironbreaker look. I think they're just awesome models.
And they do have some of the best armor in the game. When you, and
Hmm.
particularly if you combine it with the anvil, giving them some kind of a bonus to +1 or reroll to their armor saves, that is
Hmm.
nuts. And when you're toughness 4 with a 3+ armor save, that is very durable. Um,
Hmm. Yeah, so
so
coming out of the game with the
yeah,
full plate armor, that's not common. So that's already a huge jump over most of the infantry in the game.
yeah, and I think it just depends on whether in these in particular, these guys are very good at grinding out other infantry because if infantry charge you, they very often bounce off, and then you with strength 4 AP 1 with your attacks, you can just mince through things like regular chaos warriors, gore,
Hmm.
state
Hmm.
troops, goblins. Sure, you can mince through them, but then what happens if a monster charges you or something like that? Then you're still durable, but it's just you're not going to do very much back, and that's fine if you are so durable that it doesn't really matter, right?
Hmm.
So that's fine.
Now, what else do they have besides the drilled and the full play we talked about? They
They have a
also
six
have
up ward.
the runes of protection. So that's great to just have a 6-up ward. That's that additional layer that comes built in without having to pay more points. That's great value.
So I mean, I think that if you have somewhere that you really want to defend, these guys are the absolute most elite at just sitting there and not letting someone get through, which is cool. I think that's great.
Yeah,
And you know
and their
what?
full play counts as Grommel armor, right? I believe
They
it
have
does.
Gromroll armor, so they reroll ones on their armor saves, and they have AP 1 on their axes from Gromroll weapons.
So yeah, so they have the full plate armor plus the shield plus the reroll for the Grommel armor plus the ward save.
And stubborn.
This is about and stubborn. So for infantry, this is about as tough as you can get in almost pretty much the whole game right now. They are very tough.
Right, and I think that's great. Um, Very hard to get through this without anything that's like AP 2 or 3. Like,
Hmm.
my Gromwell Great Axes from the Royal Clan Warriors are pretty cool with the AP 3. I think there's a
Hmm.
small growth recently of things that are like, oh, I'm AP 3 all of a sudden. Cool. I think that's interesting. And then these units are like, oh no, because I think before that there was very rarely you could see anything having AP 3. So having that 3+ armor save, rerolling ones, it was like, well, most people only have AP 2 in their whole list, and that's it. And that's gonna be hard to even
Yeah,
get through that.
that's very true. Yep.
So
Hmm.
really, I think if you are going to take the elite infantry, you very often pick between these two, and then you kind of go whether off. You really love the idea of just smashing face with your regular rank and file guys, or if you just want a unit that's incredibly durable, while you have a king in there who does all of the fighting by himself.
Yeah, because typically you're only going to be able to really afford one beefy unit like this in your list. So it's typically one or the other.
Unless if they're like 10 guys, which is
Yep. But
you know
now now you're playing the more MSU build. It's a different type of list if you go that route.
it's really hard to play MSU if you're slow.
Yes, yes, it is. So
Except if
yep.
you use Irondrakes, who are
Ooh,
often run as little units of 5 guys who have Trollhammer torpedoes, because the Trollhammer torpedo is basically just a cannonball
awesome. Hmm.
for 15 points.
Yep,
I
but
mean, it's
not
not.
not quite a cannonball, but it's pretty good.
It's actually better than cannonball.
Well, pros and cons. I mean, it doesn't have the range of a cannonball because it's only 24-inch range, but it's
Yeah,
still strength 8. It's still so it's like almost. And there are very few things in the game that are above. I mean, most things cap out at T6. There are some things that go to T7. I mean, there's like the steam tank gets really tough, but just generally speaking, 99% of the game you will wound on 2+. Right, with strength 8. So it's like, well, it's all pretty much as good a 10 at that point because there's so few things that you're going to wound most monsters on 2+, right? There'll be toughness 6 most monsters. So, and it still has the AP of that, right? So, and it still does the D3. It's pretty close to a cannon.
well, a
I think the
regular
range
dwarf
is
cannon's only
quite a
AP
difference.
2, not 3, which is a big problem
Oh,
actually.
yeah, that's a
So
good
that's
point.
one of
Well,
the
I haven't
reasons why
gotten to
people like
cannons yet, though.
these.
Hmm.
However, the other build that a lot of people do is they're actually going to take a big unit of Irondrakes because they're pretty similar to Ironbreakers, except they also shoot. Because we've got the full
Hmm.
plate, we've got the Grummel armor, we have stubborn,
Hmm.
we still weapon skill 4, so we're still pretty good on that front. So I mean, if
Hmm.
you drop the shield, but you get a gun, and
Yep.
and you're pretty much the same number of points. So
Hmm.
and when you're Bliss Skill 4 with a Strength 5 gun, I think that that's something that makes a lot of sense to either bring one big unit that has a lot of support or many smaller units that bring a lot of Trollhammer torpedoes.
Yep. and the models look great. I think it's really just the slot. Are these in the which slot are they in? Were they in
They're
rare
in
or
rare.
special? They're rare. So I think that's the biggest limiting factor. I think if they were in special, people would just build half their army with
Yeah,
these
but what's
things.
the difference
So
between special and rare if you have 1,000 points of characters, Mike?
you're not wrong, sir. You're not wrong. But I bet you that will change in the future. So I'm optimistic that it's going to. So Irondrakes are awesome. We see a lot of them on the table all the time. It's really hard to leave home without any at all, unless you take an arcane journal list where you have a different list that doesn't have Irondrakes in it. But typically you get to see at least one, if not two. And I think
Yeah.
the most common thing is you see one bigger brick or two smaller bricks relative to how many, whether the player's going for a more durable unit or more of their troll hammer
Yeah,
torpedoes.
these guys are kind of like the dwarf version of Sisters of Avalorn.
Mm-hmm.
I'm
Yeah,
just saying that to
I
trigger
think that's
people.
very fair. Well, it's okay, but great unit, great models. Definitely should take. Oh, they're pretty close to an auto take for the dwarf army.
So, miners. For some reason, these guys are a special unit. I kind of feel like they could be a core unit because they're basically a dwarf warrior who has ambush.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and probably sings as it goes to work, but
Yeah, they
that's
whistle
different.
while they work, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely. But they have Vanguard, which is great. Ambushers, and again, Ambushers is super, super fun. I guess it turns a lot of people off because it's just not reliable. I think, but I think we
Well,
see it a
Mike,
lot
you
more
buy
in
a
the
steam
list.
drill and you get to reroll the
Yeah,
d6 every
which
turn.
is huge. But still not necessarily for everybody. I think part of the challenge is they pop up, which is great. They're still moving three. And so they're still like, we're here. And like, don't don't go anywhere. We're going to be there in a couple turns to charge you. That's the problem with miners, right? If they could pop up, or if they were skirmishing, or if they could pop up
So,
closer,
you know what the best formation is to be an ambusher? It's open order.
what?
You know why it's open
Okay,
order?
why? Tell
Because
us
when
why.
you arrive from ambush, you can't march,
Hmm.
but you do get to
That's true.
move and use an
Hmm.
open order 90-degree free pivot.
It does help.
So when you
That
show up
does
like
help.
when the enemy's like facing you, right, and you show up next to them, you get to walk
Hmm.
forwards into the battlefield and then do a free pivot, which means you almost go twice your movement just by doing that.
Yeah, relatively to the unit and the size and the position, that's totally true. But I guess what I would just love to see is not necessarily this unit go faster, but I would love to see, and they started doing that a whole bunch in 40K, where they allowed certain units when they were deep striking, arriving from ambush in that game, closer to the enemy unit to again promote more engagement. So I think this was, in my opinion, a potential opportunity in the future where I don't want to see them going triple or whatever more speed, and it's not fun for them to literally pop up underneath my unit. That's kind of a Skaven thing. But I would love to see them be able to, when they arrive on the battlefield, actually get closer than what the core
Right.
rulebook allows you to get close with that. I think that would make this unit a lot more exciting, and I think we'd see it a lot more often.
They could also be a little bit cheaper than 12 points each for a dwarf warrior with a great weapon, so they should be something like 10.
Yeah.
Like that's a lot.
Um, yeah.
Yeah, and
Totally fair.
but the main reason why I'm bringing them up, and then why I don't think people should totally discount them, is because hey, if you're having a hard time getting across the battlefield to the other person objectives, you could bring the miners to show up.
Yeah. Or get to your point, we're going to see different scenarios, right? When it's no longer about I have to ambush the enemy and now I have to charge them in order to win the game. If it's I need to just get into the enemy's deployment zone,
Yeah.
right? Or I need to go tear down a banner that's in this, or I need to get to this corner of the table. Suddenly, the power of miners to be able to do that and to be very durable in terms of a unit that can ambush with heavy armor in T4, they are very durable. So I think they will start to shine a lot more as we see these other scenario win conditions start to become more prominent.
Yeah, and then we have another unit that I think could potentially be a core unit, or maybe in a different army of infamy could be core. Is like this is the Slayers,
Hmm.
and another unit that's like oddly expensive compared to other things as well because they have the dwarf stat line, but they don't have any armor. And
No,
I don't
no,
think I
no.
think that the entire game, every unit that has unbreakable is overpriced. If it doesn't have unstable as well, if you just have unbreakable natively, you cost more than you should because most units in the game, just if you have a decent leadership or a BSB, you just fall back in good order. Like you don't really run away as much. So unbreakable isn't as good as it used to be. It used to be incredibly good because units would just get hit in a single round of combat and then they would just run away and get murdered. So it'd be like, wow, Unbreakable. That's
And
great.
I think that's where they've overpriced it. I think they've overpriced it based upon previous editions and how powerful it was in previous editions. First, we actually find in the current edition that for the most part, round 1 and 2, it is almost always give ground or fall back in good order. It is rarely that someone, and it's actually more fun, and we get more engagement and more variety, and the game feels a lot better. But to your Evan's point, Unbreakable is less of a delta now in terms of its power than what it used to be, and it feels like the premium to have that rule just feels overpriced in the current edition of the game and the way the game is played.
So a Giant Slayer has weapon
Hmm.
skill 5, strength 4, and 2 attacks
Cool.
each. Like he's kind of like a
Awesome.
chosen. He's like a
Hmm.
chosen dwarf. He just doesn't have any freaking
Hmm.
armor.
No armor. That's the problem. Or did they have ward saves anymore?
No,
Or
no,
are
they
they
don't have any
taking
kind
away all
of
the
ward save.
no?
They don't even have like war paint. They have magic resistance too.
Yeah, I just wish they had the war paint or something that would give them like a 5-up ward save or something, and then I'd feel a lot better about
Well,
this.
because
But
having high weapon skill doesn't make you harder to kill, really.
no, well, the biggest problem is they're just so vulnerable to just any ranged attack, with like just single magic missile or single volley fire from something of no armor whatsoever, will just wipe them out. They're
Yeah,
just
and
so
they have
vulnerable.
Death Blow, but Death Blow will like so if you charge them in combat with like a bunch of Dark Riders and cut them all down, then
Hmm.
Death Blow might do something. It's usually I think it says it's strength 3, but it does wound on a 4 up, so it's like basically you have a 50-50 shot to do a wound that has no AP, I think, after you kill a guy.
Yeah, and that's
So
right. So that I think that's the problem is the things that you're going to want to use death, or the things you're going to want to use the Slayer ability. The biggest thing is, hey, I'm going to be able to wound things that are typically harder to wound because I always wound on these the die roll. But the problem is the things that you typically need to roll those higher things have armor, right? And you just don't have the AP to tear apart their armor. So
well, yeah, because
I
the
think
death blow
everyone
doesn't
loves
use your weapon.
Slayers.
So if you have a great weapon, you don't get to use your great weapon with the death blow. You just
Yeah,
use.
it's so there's just problems with the Slayer unit. I love the models; they're so iconic. They're so Games Workshop. Like seriously, in terms of dwarves, like Slayers are just so iconic to making a Games Workshop dwarf army or Warhammer or dwarf army than dwarf armies in any other game systems or faction out there. And I love them so much, and I want them to be so good. But it feels like they just didn't quite hit the mark on the rules here, and we were all hoping that the Arcane Journal would have a Slayer list, and they even said they kind of sort of do with some aspects of it. But hopefully, we'll see maybe a future Arcane Journal Slayer list where they can give them more love and attention. We could see them get some more
Yeah,
upgrades
it
because
may be
they need
because
some
they need
more support.
models. Because those metal
Could be.
ones, I have 10 of them. They're hard to paint and they're also really old. I mean, if they come up with new Slayer
So
models, then maybe, yeah.
even you have your limit on how old the model, the nostalgia factor goes for the models. Yeah, we all have our limits.
A little bit.
That being said, the Fire Slayer models in AOS are super badass, and those are totally great too for people who love using the AOS models for their old world models. They're great. So hopefully we'll see more Slayer love
Those
in the
ones look
future. But right
ridiculous. I'm
now,
sorry.
well, some of them also look incredible.
Her
And
hair
again,
is
keep in
like
mind,
taller than they are. It's crazy.
well, if you look at some of those old dwarf slayers, they have some pretty righteous
Yeah,
mohawks, or
yeah.
so. I don't think that's new. But
Their
anyway,
hands are
moving
too
on
big.
from the slayers,
So,
gyrocopters.
so instead of a unit of 5 Slayers who walk around really slowly and get shot to death, you could have a
Hmm.
Gyrocopter, which flies around really fast and shoots everyone else instead.
Hmm. And is a lot more durable.
It's really cheap too, and their
Hmm.
toughness 5.
Hmm.
So, like in Beastmen, it's incredibly good to take Razor Gore because there are 3 wounds, toughness 5. They're like
Toughness
52
5.
points, and they run around, they
Hmm.
charge stuff. They're awesome. This is something that flies, has much better leadership, and can
Hmm.
shoot.
Yep, they're
Gyrocopter
super
might be one
cool.
of the best units in the game, like for
It
what it's
really
trying to
is.
do.
And it's a cool model. And again, it's fun, it's thematic, it's very effective. And there was the fear at first when the edition came out that, oh my God, you could take, a million gyrocopters and such. And then some communities immediately implemented a rule of three. We didn't actually implement in our community, in the Old World Legends community, a rule of three for quite some time. Eventually, we embraced it because the community was asking for it. But generally speaking, our community wasn't really abusing it. It wasn't really an issue. But that being said, gyrocopters are fantastic. They're a great utility piece. They do whittle down. They have damage output. They are durable. They are the most mobile thing you have in the dwarf army. It's like, again, they're about pretty much an auto take because you need some of those mobility utility units, especially for such a slow army. The gyrocopters bringing that movement and that getting in the way, whether you're sacrificing it, redirecting it, shooting down fast cavalry. There's so many things you can do with it, and for the price point, you kind of can't leave home without at least a couple of them.
Yeah, and you have multiple gun options. So you have the steam gun, which does have the breath attack, but you automatically hit. So you don't have to like roll to hit.
Hmm.
That's cool.
Hmm. Hmm.
I mean, you roll to hit when you get the partial hits, but that you didn't have to roll to hit the first time. And then you have the brimstone gun, which is a bit stronger, maybe more of like an anti
Hmm.
cavalry thing. It's a little bit harder to hit
Hmm.
because you have the multiple shots. So you're going to suffer some penalty with that. But you also have multiple shots with clatter guns. So either way, you're going to be hitting on like fives, right?
Yep.
And I assume people take the clatter guns a lot because you can march and shoot, which means you can move, point blank range and just fire a bunch of shots of hitting on fives.
Hmm.
But they
Yep.
both have quick shot as well, so they can stand and shoot with them. And if you take the
Yep.
steam gun, you can't really do the fire and flee thing because you don't have a weapon to shoot at them with.
Well, they're also skirmishers again, so they have the 360, and again, these are also great units to just fly behind the enemy front ranks and just sit behind them. So, right, you have your hammerers or your Irondrakes or whatever slamming into those other units, and they're going to flee. You want a gyrocopter behind them, right? And so they'll flee through the gyrocopter and get damaged that way. On top of which, the gyrocopter can also charge into the flank or rear of one of those other units, and it has swift stride, right? So if you're like, yeah, I'm going to break them in combat. I want a chance if they flee. I want to run them down. The gyrocopter is one of the most effective things in the dwarf army to do that because it's one of the rare things for dwarves that have swift
Yeah,
stride. So again, it is the ultimate utility piece for this army. There are so many things this unit can do.
yeah, and it's pretty hard. I think toughness 5 is a big breakpoint for being hard to shoot. A lot of the strength 3 peasant longbows stuff like that. It's going to be hard for them to take this thing down, right?
Hmm.
Even a
Hmm.
fireball, it's having to wound on fives. This thing might last against a fireball. It's a pretty
Yep,
good shot at not
totally.
dying to it. I think that you generally just going to use those to help support your infantry getting where they're trying to go. It's not taking away from the infantry. It's a utility piece, acting like a one-man unit of. It's like I often have to bring a 5-man unit of light cavalry to do what this thing's doing, but it's kind of better at it.
Hmm. Yep.
And then the
But it is
Gyrobomber
support.
is weird. So it counts as a monster, so it doesn't have the 360, and it has to wield a turn. And then the bombing run doesn't do very much as well.
No.
This thing has a dive bomb rule, which is fine, and
Hmm.
then the bombing run
Hmm.
on this thing isn't very interesting. So you're paying a lot of points to be worse in a lot of ways.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, that's the I want to like this unit so much. I want it to be on the battlefield again. Nobody takes them. It's a combination of both. The points cost are too high for even if the bomb was effective, and then on top of that, the bomb itself is just not effective. It's just and again, and as Evan pointed out, the triple down problem is that it also doesn't have the mobility. So it doesn't have the mobility to really do the strafing runs that you want when you hit things with the bombs just aren't very effective. So you're just better off using the other, and you're paying a premium for it. So again, this is why we just don't see it on the battlefield.
you know what really screws it up? Direct hit gives you the large blast that scatters in its strength for AP1. This is better than the next result, Bombs Away, which is 2 small blasts that scatter. This is infinitely worse than a single large blast. And I know this because I love casting Fire Convocation, which is this large blast strength 4, AP2. And
Hmm.
that's great. I'd love that. But then if I roll Bombs Away, it's like, oh no, now there's 2 small ones? Well, that's not going to do anything. The
Or
large
just
blast.
not as much. Yeah.
Well, yeah, a single large blast, even if it scatters, very often does a lot of hits to
Hmm.
big units of like 20 night goblins or whatever. But 2
Absolutely.
small blasts very often does nothing. It's just
Now explain that. Why is it doing nothing? Is because you're
it's
saying
because of the
because
partials.
uh, right? Yeah,
And large
I think
blasts very often have a lot of complete, whole models are under them. And then
yeah,
small
that's
blasts,
I
it's
just wanted to
like,
explain that to everybody, right?
yeah,
Because it's the if you're wholly under it, it's auto hit versus if you're partially under it, it's 50-50. So it sounds like two smaller would be better because it's more effective or or better odds of hitting. But the reality is, half of the large blast hitting because you have whole hits is significantly more effective than three quarters or whatever of the small blast because of that rule. So that's why I think they just there were good intentions here in the
It
design,
should
and I
it
think
should
it just
say large blast 5 inches
yeah,
that scatters D3 inches instead of D6. That's what it should say.
that would be much more effective. So again, there are multiple avenues where love the bomber. I think it needs another pass by the rules team
It's also
to
not very
make it more
expensive
effective.
though, so it's whatever. Like
Yep.
it's only a little bit more than a regular gyrocopter, so if you want to use it,
Well, how much is the regular gyrocopter?
60.
So 35 points more. So it's it's 50%. It's more than 50% more, right?
Yeah, but that's not that much.
Or well, for something that does a lot less.
It doesn't necessarily do less, right? Like this bombing run could do plenty,
Good.
right?
But also, again, the mobility is a big factor in how effective you can make your bombing runs.
Can you march over it and do this? Yeah, you can march in while during the bombing run, right? Yeah. It has to
Remaining moves
move by
phase,
flying during remaining moves phase. That's it.
yeah, but it's not skirmishing.
Also, another thing you could have done is you could have said, I can do a bombing run to every unit I move over, not
That
just
would be
one.
different too.
Not just one.
Anyway, we're speculating. So again, we like the bomber. We'd love to see more of them. It needs some rules love.
Okay, so now we're going to see all the artillery because we've got the infantry, we've got the helicopters, now we have artillery. And starting with a bolt thrower, so 55 points, which is decently more expensive than the goblin one, while having the same ballistic skill, which is the
Yeah.
big bummer for me because there's no way to make it easier to the ballistic skill, and you have so many minuses to hit that's a bummer. And it's just like, okay, nothing. There's no penalties whatsoever. You're firing at a large target at point blank range. You hit on a 4+. I already have to have a hard
Does
time
not feel
wounding.
good. Yep. I just wish they were ballistic skill 4. I think if they were ballistic skill 4, we'd see them. But since they're not, we just never see them.
And then you can spend a bunch of points on engineering runes to give it like skewering, which is pretty cool. It has like it ignores all armor saves if you do that.
Still have to hit.
But it's also, yeah, you still have to actually hit somebody, and there's no way to make that any better at all. Even the engineers, that you can't. It's not like Empire where you can use the engineer's ballistic skill. You can't do that. So
Yep.
kind of annoying.
So yeah, it's not quite effective. Grudge thrower though, so classic stone thrower, right? The dwarven version. So you don't have that hitting problem with the ballistic skill. And I think they're great, but I think generally speaking, we don't see them combine as much because of the meta in terms of there are less larger bricks. I think if we start seeing more larger bricks, we'll see more of them out there. So I think, and then players I think are just gravitating more towards those cannons and other things that are more focused on taking down a dragon or other bigger MSU, smaller armies, which is why I think we just don't see a lot of these.
Yeah, and the dwarf artillery does have stubborn, which is really, really, really cool. So if someone sends like a single small unit of hobgoblins into it and they kill one crewman, well, you have
Hmm.
stubborn at least once. You can just fall back, and then they have to spend a lot of time trying to get rid of you. So having stubborn on your artillery is pretty cool. In fact, if you have your bolt throwers or something out in front and they use stubborn to fall back, behind a line of infantry, well, then they can keep shooting because maybe they didn't even die, right?
Yeah, true. And you are T4, so again, you are tougher than the average crew
Crew, yeah.
for other things. And it feels like you're not really paying a massive premium for that T4. So again, Grudge Thrower and Bolt Thrower, I think the Bolt Thrower needs that additional ballistic skill. Grudge Thrower, I think we have a chance of seeing more of them as the meta starts shifting.
But this is honestly just a problem with everything in the entire game that's skill 3 that doesn't have poison.
True. It's not dwarf specific.
And I think that it's just, there should be a rule that says, hey, maybe you don't get a -1 to hit at long range. I don't know.
There's a lot of ways that they could go about. And again, who knows? Maybe in the next FAQ, we'll see something to help them, or maybe in the future. But dwarf cannons. Let's talk about those, Evan. What do you think?
So they're pretty cheap. They do have the stubborn again and the T4, and their toughness 7 against shooting, which is also really, really cool. And they could buy runes, which give you the ability to get magical attacks for shooting at things like, banshees and stuff like that. Very, very
Yeah, which is
useful.
good.
And then every dwarf player ever goes grumble, 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 but it's only strength 8, AP2, D3 wounds, not like the Empire one, which is so much better. Wah. And that's true. But the Empire
Yeah.
one has worse leadership, doesn't have stubborn, the crew are toughness 3, and they can't buy any runes whatsoever, including that rune that means you misfire and you can't shoot for the hell game. So
Yeah, it is. It is interesting their approach on this. And again, it's always hard to compare army to army because you really shouldn't, because there's so many factors in it. but it's hard to just not compare the dwarf canon to the empire canon when they're so similar in so many different ways. And again, the dwarf canon is still good. We absolutely still see them, and I think it's and again, the runes you could buy for them absolutely are interesting and helpful, but you are spending a lot more points now for something that could still just misfire and blow itself up right away. So I think we all just wish it was just as effective as the empire was, and this probably feel a little bit better.
Then we have the organ gun, which is similar in a very similar boat because it's very similar price to the Hellblaster volley gun, but it just has like
Mhm.
50% less bullets, and it can't use the engineer's ballista skill.
Yeah, that's the thing that surprises me is not using his ballistic skill, because the whole concept behind dwarf war machines is they're tried, they're true, they're tested, they've been around for a long time, they're reliable, right? Well,
Yeah.
they're actually not really more reliable. And so, if they're going to have less damage output but be more reliable, okay, that's a compelling trade-off. But because of the way the rules are written right now, it doesn't actually play out that way on the battlefield, right? If it was, hey, the dwarf machine literally can't blow itself up, or for instance, right, it would, well, half the shots, so there's so many ways they could have gone about doing it, but they're not. You're just as likely to kill yourself, and you're less likely to hit than your empire
I
counterparts.
think the dwarf one, the engineers can give them reroll ones to hit, maybe, but that's reroll ones to hit on a 6+ is not as good as not rerolling ones but hitting on a 5+. So
Yep,
with
makes
more
a huge
bullets too. Remember, 50% more shots.
Yep, the math just doesn't work out.
Okay, but Empire doesn't have a flame cannon, and the flame cannon
No.
is great because it shoots fire, and the fire template
Hmm.
is really cool. It's
Hmm.
really short range. How fire templates work with this thing, it's like you can't even shoot at anything more than like 24 inches away in total, maybe something like that, because
Hmm.
it kind of shoots an artillery dice forward and then it puts the template down. So
The template. Yep.
it's
Yep.
pretty limited with where it can go. But I think this thing is really neat, and I want it to be very cool. And I will mention that if an enemy unit has occupied a tower or a building in the core rulebook and it is hit by a template of any kind, every single model in the unit that's inside gets hit on a 5+.
Hmm.
So, flame template, flame cannon.
Yeah, I think they're really, really cool. I think it's just not, again, an effective tool to take down dragons or big monsters. But again, I think I'm optimistic that as the meta starts shifting towards this objective play scenario, and I always said a lot in this going through this list, I think we will see more of these on the table in the future.
And this is also one of the artillery pieces that's basically just you buy one and it has the rules that are out of the core rulebook. So whatever the core rulebook
Mhm.
says is what this thing does. So if they have to keep the core rulebook, it makes this different, right?
Yep. Yep. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, and I will point out though that this thing has a fire thrower for 125 points, and I think the Skaven can get something that does this for like 70 points. So
Yep.
it's kind of
You're
weird.
not wrong.
Anyway, we have to go into the engineering and banner runes because those are the ones that affect units.
Hmm.
So we go down to those. So we already went through the Master Rune of Grungni because that one can only go down on the battle standard anyway.
Yep.
What are the other banner runes? Well, Stromny Redbeard is, every unit within command range can get the +1 to its combat resolution. This seems like such a cool idea. For 75 points, you have one unit in the center of your battle line, and all the other units nearby can also have +1 combat res. But, like, if the command range is like 8 inches, and I'm one unit, then there's only ever going to be 2 more units next to me,
Hmm.
right? And
Yeah.
couldn't we all just buy the Rune of Battle, which does the same thing for the same number of points, if just all of us had it separately?
Yeah, now you're not putting all your eggs in that one basket. That's right. So again, it sounds really
Kind of
cool,
weird.
but the math just doesn't work out. Again, it'd be different if it said for 75 points it does this and it increases your command range of your BSB to 12 inches or 16 inches. Okay, now we're talking about that, but you're not on a monster or large target that's going to increase your command range radius. So again, it is just limited on what are the potential units that this could affect. And you don't really want your BSB, hiding in between units, and you want them in the unit
I think that other
to
hammers
yeah.
can take this. I think, right? They have enough points.
Yeah, that would be an
But again,
example.
if I have a hammer
Yeah.
unit and the BSB's in there and he's got the Master Rune of Grungni, and then the hammer unit has this, and it also has a Rune of Battle, so it combines those two things, and I also want to try to
Yeah.
stick 2 units next to them that also have 2 runes of Rune of Battle, well, that's 150 points just for those ones, and then the 80 points there. So that's like
Like
200
a
points of my
2,000
entire
point
army
list, you're
that's
you're
just
not going
trying
to
to.
have point.
Yeah. Like, how many
You
points
have
in
the
my army
points,
am I
sir.
putting just runes on banners, right?
It just you don't have the points to pull that off and have enough units that are effective where that would matter.
Dwarves have a
Yeah.
ton of really cool upgrades that are very expensive, and I wonder if even the best dwarf players spend too many points on the upgrades when you could just have more dudes. Because again,
Hmm.
how does the Master Rune of Stromney Redbeard keep me from being shot to death by a Hellblaster Volley Gun? Or a 40 Poison Archers?
Yeah, it doesn't. And again, this is why we see a lot of the patterns right now because the dwarf players are responding to the metas of the dragons, and what's effectively out there right now, and the MSU style. So effectively, they're trying to double, triple down on that Death Star where they're giving up no points to their opponent or as few points as possible. So I think it is limiting and narrowing the what we're seeing on the battlefield and the dwarf players play is, they're trying to make competitive lists and nothing wrong with that. I totally get it. So again, I think hopefully we're going to see more variety that will break open this narrow band we're seeing for competitive lists and seeing broader, more combined armed forces lists with more interesting variety on the battlefield.
So then there's a very contentious one, the Master Rune of Hesitation, which for 45 points, the unit, when it's charged, doesn't count as being charged for the purposes of like having lances, furious charge, impact hits,
Hmm.
initiative
Hmm.
bonuses.
Hmm.
But what if they just don't charge you? And then you never get to
Hmm.
fight them because they went and killed every other unit in your army and not this one.
Yep.
In
And
particular, when you
again,
put
that's
this on a
also
unit of
not
hammerers, it becomes so overpowered that no one will ever even fight you.
and that's not specific to this rune. That's just a problem that dwarfs have in general. If
Yeah,
you start making and the veteran players realized, hey, someone's going to make that Death Star unit. Well, I just will. You only need to win by 100 points. I don't need to kill this 1,500 point unit. I'm going to go kill the other things because they're much easier to kill, and I don't need to get 100 points to win this battle. So, again, this is a problem that the dwarf army has in general, which is again we're trying to encourage the dwarf community to make lists that are not Death Star focused, that have more gyrocopters, have more war machines, have more rangers, have more variety, have so that you can play that bigger game versus the battlefield, and you can sucker, get the opponent to charge into something and have that counter punch, right? Because
yeah.
if that unit is just too tough, they're just not going to charge it. And then what was the point of spending the points on it to begin with?
Um, and then we have Rune of Confusion. So for 35 more points, you can make them have a disorder charge, which basically just means they just don't get the initiative bonus. But if your units have great weapons or low initiative anyway, like even a hammer only has what, like initiative 3 or 4,
Hmm.
then a lot of things are just going to be able to beat you anyway, even without the initiative bonus. So I understand that these could be very, very good, because getting a strike before the other person's great. But if you can strike before the other person, they might just not charge you at all. Whereas I think the
Yeah.
strength of the dwarves lies in the fact that they charge you. They somehow, or they don't realize that they're not going to kill anybody because they're so tough, and then you hit them. Not because you have this rune that says, never charge me ever, sir. You will not be
Yeah.
having a good time.
It's
Right?
just too contextual. I like the idea, but the opportunities for it to be applicable are just too few.
Also, if you bought this, if you didn't buy it, you could just get like a bolt thrower basically for that number of points. You can just have a bolt thrower hanging out, shooting stuff, trying to do its thing. Like,
Yep.
so, a lot of dwarf armies will have 400 points of runes.
It's so many points.
Like, that's a lot of runes. The
So many
king will have
points.
125. The banner bearer guys, he's going to have 100 something. And then you've got these kind of banner runes and other kinds of runes in the army and runes on the artillery. You're going to have 400 points of runes. It's like that could have been a whole nother unit of 20 hammerers.
Yeah, and I think it's just inherently the way this army is constructed. There are really good upgrades, but you're paying for them, and it's just a very easily slippery slope with this list to really over invest in the magic items and runes when you'd be better off having more units and soldiers on the battlefield.
It could be, for sure. Rune of Fear for 30 points, you have Fear. It means you don't have to take terror checks as well, but I don't. I think that's a lot of points. And also, Fear only really does anything by itself if you have a lot of dudes, and most
Hmm.
dwarf units aren't that big. So
Right.
I don't really know why this is here. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
And then you have Rune of
Anyway.
Battle, which is the rare. I
Hmm.
think the Rune of Battle is very, very common and very, very good. It's just a
Yep.
war banner, but hey, it's common, so you basically just get to take this as many times as you want, as long as you
Yep.
have. I think you have to combine it because you still can't have duplicates, right? So you have to combine
Correct.
this with other stuff.
Hmm. Yep. So that's why typically you're always going to see one. You aren't necessarily going to see an army with more than one.
Yeah. Then you have Vanguard for 25 points to get Vanguard is a lot of points.
Hmm.
And you especially when you're vanguarding 3 inches, but people still do it to do the dwarf yeet list and other kinds of builds. But I think you could also just buy more guys, especially if you're buying many of these things that you could potentially turn into more units or more models in the unit you already have. Um,
Hmm.
don't let your desire to not have to paint that many models contribute to your not having a very
Well,
big
you
army.
should. Hey, unit fillers are a thing, right? Right. You
Yeah.
don't want to pay more models. Just fill in those rear ranks with unit fillers, right? There were whole articles from GW saying unit fillers are great and a great way to be creative. You should definitely use them.
I think Rune of Courage is very, very good for 15 points for passing Fear and Terror, because again, you have to
Hmm.
pass every single terror check. There is no reroll, even if you're leadership 10. If you fail it, you just get run down by the dragon or run down by whatever it was.
Hmm.
You do not want that to happen. So,
Yeah, for
15
15
points,
points, it's great.
I don't care how big your unit is, you don't want that to happen.
Hmm.
So I think that
Yeah,
one shows up a
feels
lot
good.
too.
Hmm.
Okay, then we have engineering runes, and annoyingly enough, you cannot put these on organ guns or flame cannons, which is lame. I want flame cannons to have
Yeah,
stuff.
it is weird. It's like, were they doing that because they felt that was thematic? It doesn't feel thematic to me. Or were they doing that because they were concerned that it would make the flame cannon or organ gun too good? I mean, it would definitely make them better, but I'm not seeing any combos here that I'm like, wow, this organ gun or flame cannon are suddenly going to be game breaking. I really wish that they would remove that restriction and allow them to do that. I know there's the whole like, well, an organ gun or a flame cannon, they're more modern dwarf tech, and so it might have been theme thing of they're only going to put runes on the traditional, reliable things they've been using for thousands of years or whatever. But from a gameplay standpoint, I think it'd be a lot more fun and exciting if they allowed them to put runes on war machines.
Yeah, I also think that maybe the flame cannon could just have master and immolation by itself. Like, so this is for 30 extra points. You can make your cannon blow itself up and do some D6 strength 5 hits, but that's like, I don't know. I mean, maybe it'll kill the kind of unit that usually fights a cannon, but that's also more victory points you're giving to the person who just killed your cannon because now it had more points on it. So instead of 100
That's
points, it's
true.
130 for their. That's 30% more points for them to get off you. It's also a third of a
Yep.
cannon.
Yep.
A lot
So it
of
does make a lot of
points.
sense.
Okay. And then the disguise gets it behind full cover, which is fine, except if you're fighting Tomb Kings who have poison and they just shoot poison arrows that don't always hit on 5+ against you and they just kill your cannon.
Yeah.
But
Well, and
otherwise,
again, also the
it's fine.
war machines are typically very tough. So the needing, behind full cover for ballistic skill shooting rarely is applicable to Evan's point. It's really only, ballistic skill shooting is only typically threatening war machines when it's poison. If they're poisons, they don't care about this anyway. So it's just a nice idea. Doesn't seem to be very applicable.
Yeah, or let's say it's a cannon, right? The cannon doesn't care about cover, so it just blows you up too.
No, not going to care at all about that cover. So again,
It's definitely
I'd
not
feel
worth
different about it if
25 points. I think one of the armies of infamy gets you some cover for some of your war machines, but like that's free. So
Yeah, but again, if it was 25 points, if it gave me cover and or again it somehow helped me versus template or cannon shots, that would be a different story, or even magic. But again, even magic attacks automatically hit when they shoot at you. So again, just the opportunities for that to be applicable or where it really
right.
would matter are so few.
The good news is though is that there's a ton of ones here that are pretty cheap. So we have a 20 points rune of skewering. It gives +1 strength, so that makes it strength 7, which is very very
Hmm.
useful, and it gives you
Hmm.
no armor saves against it,
Hmm.
which is also very
That,
very useful.
that's great. Unfortunately, still I'm shooting a ballistic skill 3.
Yeah, and if you let's say you say okay, I'll take multiple bolt throwers. Well, now they all need to have these runes on them.
Eh.
So I think that when you
Yeah,
see bolt throwers, they very often have this rune just because then it makes them actually do something.
it's a real threat if you do hit. It's a legitimate threat if you hit something for sure.
We have Rune of Forging, so you get to have reroll on the misfire artillery dice. This is really, really useful for 15 points because
Hmm.
you just, the first time you misfire, you really just do not want to have misfired. It doesn't matter when that misfire happens, you don't want it to happen. So, I mean, Empire
I don't
doesn't
think
get
the
that.
second time you want to misfire either, or the third time.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, blowing yourself up is typically not a good strategy.
Rune of Burning gets Flaming. This is generally not needed because a lot of things have more resistance to flaming than they have weakness to it. And then
Hmm.
reloading for only 5 points, you can make it so it shoots every turn, even if it misfired. So there's one particular result where you misfire and you can't shoot for 2 turns in a row, which is awful, and it makes
Awful.
you very often like your cannon's just out of the game because if that happens turn two, you can't shoot turn two or turn three. By the time turn four happens, that cannon might just be dead.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is rare, honestly, for war machines to go 6 turns in the game. And even if they are still alive on turn 4 or 5 or 6, most things are in combat at that point or have moved to like they having an actual target you want to shoot at. So again, war machines are truly super applicable in the first 1 to 3 turns of the game. The second half of the game, they become less relevant. So
Well,
being
it
not
depends
if
whether
you
they
are
got
not
to
able
you
to
or not.
shoot.
If they didn't get to you, then they're still really relevant,
Well,
right?
if they didn't get to you, then you're probably already winning anyway, in which case it's not such a big deal.
Or if
So
you're playing
it
another gunline army and you're just still just lobbing crap at each other.
sure, if you're two gun lines just blowing the shit out and blowing up each
Yeah.
other, absolutely. So yeah, you're not wrong. But so good 5 points. It's a great price point for it.
All right, in Stalwart Rune, you get combat res point. I think this is usually just taken so that you can get a duplicate of another. I usually have a cannon with Rune of Reloading and Rune of Forging, and then another one with the same two, but then also Stalwart Rune, so I just get a third thing.
Yep. Yep.
And then you just
That's what
never even
people
remember
do.
that that's there, and you just forget about it. Um,
Yep.
cool. I mean, I think that engineering runes. Why isn't there one that says okay, 20 points, bolt throws only gives you plus one ballistic skill?
Hmm.
That'd be kind of
Yep.
cool.
Or again, I think that if we could put these on flame cannons or the other war machines, there'd be a lot more compelling things we could potentially see on the battlefield. But this is what we had to work with.
Yeah, organ gun, ballistic skill
Yep.
bonus potentially.
Yep.
Flame cannon. How about the partial hits are on a 3+ instead of a 4+ or something? Like,
Hmm.
I'll pay points to make them better, I guess.
Yeah. Or more AP just because it's extra hot or like tons of potential things that they could have done. Yep.
Yeah, and then there's not that there's only kind of utility things here. The only one that really makes things change dramatically the damage is just Rune of Skewering. That's the only one that's going to change what it's doing. The other ones here, they're just kind of utility pieces.
They are. So it is surprising that there aren't more ones to really like make the damage output significantly higher. And again, it
Yeah.
also they don't really make them that much more reliable. The rune of reloading is good, but in general, again, that ballistic skill or not. I just think there was more potential here they could have done with this. That hopefully we'll see maybe the next edition, some more exciting rune combinations.
Absolutely.
All right, what's next?
That's it. We've got all the
We did
units,
it.
and we got all the runes that are relevant to units specifically. So you can see now that your army really consists of heavy infantry characters. You got some artillery and support, and then you have gyrocopters. Kind of being your cavalry and screening force. That's
Hmm.
pretty much what you do as dwarves. And please don't sit down and not move. That's not how you play the game. Sorry.
Yeah, that being said, the dwarf army is awesome. The models are fantastic. They are inherently right. It is very much about that durability and about having those weapons and being very, very tough and looking really cool and having a great time playing the game. But it doesn't have those monsters and other things. So you got to get more creative. And I think I'm really hopeful that we're going to see more of that. There's a whole bunch. Oh, it's only 3 inches. I can't move. That's baloney. You have so much drilled, more drilled than any other army, where you could be moving at the triple. You have the right what's the rune called with the
Move through cover one. Yeah. It's the
move through. Yep, and then you have the anvil, right, that allows you to move to. There we go. So again, there's so much potential.
passage.
What you
Rune of
could
passage.
it, you can move actually quite fast with the dwarf army if you build it right with the Yal utility. And again, there's potential with the miners. There's potential again. I think players are very focused on those Death Star units, but I think there's a lot of potential outside of them. So hopefully, I think there are so many potential builds in other various dwarf lists that we just haven't seen yet because the meta has been so focused on killing dragons and not being killed by dragons. But as we start going away from that, I think we're going to see a lot more creativity on the battlefield.
Yeah.
All right, Evan, any last closing words?
Just stay legendary.
All right, we'll see you all next time. Bye.